All right. One of the things that may sound a little weird to an audience that doesn't remember is the High School Musical craze between 2006 and 2008, at least for people around my age. This was back when the Disney Channel was very slowly getting more and more across the world. Like, more access across the world, sorry. Changing it from an afterthought brick in the conglomerate empire to a smaller, yet still in its own right, being a necessary moneymaker for the company. At least until Disney Plus is cannibalizing both this and its major releases, and High School Musical was the spearhead that made that happen. Word of mouth spreading to the point where in 2006 my school teacher played the soundtrack in class, and in 2007, before break, when everyone finished work, we watched the movie. The thing that colored a lot of the Disney Channel's content at this time, however, was that this was still segregated by gender. So Disney was a girls' network, for lack of better words. So not only did I not watch the sequels, I actively hated the first one. With that said, I was hearing a rumbling around that this isn't a flash in the pan thing. It is still genuinely popular among my age group, from taking clips from the songs and dubbing them with what sounds correct for comedic effect. I've even heard that it's a comfort thing. It still keeps popping up everywhere, so I decided to give it a rewatch. When looking at it, the dialogue can be bad, the school life depicted feels very how do you do, fellow kids, and the music can be extremely hit and miss depending on what's happening and where. With that said, however, I bet you weren't expecting this, it's actually kind of fun. My point is that it's trash, but that doesn't necessarily make it bad. I'll try to explain. It's best described as a fluff show, which is basically the safest, most unassuming thing out there. Yet when it comes to fluff, I think that the worst crime than not being good is being boring, and weirdly, it's not boring. The voice actress of Candice Flynn, plays Sharpay, and while how this character was received is a little divisive, I love this character, here anyway. She's basically a theatre kid prima donna that thinks everything is about her and the center of the school, when in reality she is an awkward, egotistical, and overdramatic teacher's pet, and has to say ridiculous lines, and Ashley Tisdale is very clearly having fun with this. It's actually a little hard to articulate my thoughts on why the how do you do, fellow kids writing is like it is. It's stuff like the intellectual nerdy kid who confesses to being a hip hop dancer says that, quote, it's more fun than homework. I don't think any kid ever has described homework as fun. I did laugh at that, but at the same time, it's also fluff through the lens of this is representation of high school for younger children. For the children watching that, high school is aspirational and novel, while adults see it as silly and safe. It also seems to match that, like this is calculated rather than an accident. Like the subtitles, yes, really, one of them is Detention Darbus style, and it literally says help over the climax, being three events happening at the same time and trying to balance that out. It's silly and stupid, but I think there's a place for that. Yeah, I went from hating this to kind of seeing the appeal, and unless I've got it wrong, this does seem to be the appeal for why people keep coming back. With that said, this isn't the only Disney Channel original movie or DCOM franchise, plus I have never seen the sequels, so I thought, how about we look at them all? Everything that's ever had a sequel that got on the Disney Channel, I'm watching. Everything that got a remake or anything like that, I've watched. The only thing which I haven't is stuff based on shows, because I don't think it's fair, because I haven't seen those shows. Maybe except Phineas and Ferb. But again, I'm not really going to shoehorn that in here because it seems like an outlier. High School Musical 2 is inferior to the first one, just straight up. The ridiculous stuff like Sharpay having the most pull with a country club staff is the ridiculousness I've come to expect, and in the first one, I said that I actually, in a very weird way, enjoyed the unreality of this. The thing is that while a lot of it does carry the weight, what the hell even is High School Musical? Structurally, the locations may change, the circumstances may change, but it's mostly stuff like Sharpay is antagonistic towards Troy and Gabriella because first movie, Troy is having something of a crisis on his hands when it comes to friends and identity, because first movie. And so while the plot otherwise is having no surprises, it has its place. Sharpay not liking Troy and Gabriella made sense in the first movie. Take her character that I outlined earlier, and then throw in basketball jock and super genius nerdy girl trying out the musical, and of course she feels threatened. Here, it's just that she has a crush on Troy now. I think that was only once or twice, even hinted at in the first movie. Well, more like screamed at. These movies aren't subtle. That, and while people criticize the music of the first movie for being overproduced bubblegum pop, the difference between this and the first one was that there is clearly pitch correction going on in the first one, yet the first one didn't sound robotic. Oh, and the first movie ends with Troy and Gabriella finally seeing to everyone, being themselves and breaking their societal norms. The song is literally called Breaking Free, so it's not like you have to read between any lines here. Then the big song and dance number that shows that everyone learned their lesson and they're all happy. In this movie, however, the love song has everyone else dance along to it as if they've learnt their lesson, and then there's another number. This got 17 million views on initial broadcast. Yet, TV was a very different time and place 20 years ago, and I'm interested to see how many stayed during that finale, because I think that is all kinds of pointless. Otherwise, I very clearly do not like this as much as the first one, yet its inclusion of the bizarre stuff didn't make this a wholly unpleasant experience. With that said, my favourite part of this movie is actually a deleted scene. Sharpay tries to get Troy to fall in love with her by performing a Hawaiian dance number with her brother and her friends that includes having her talk like a fish. The first movie referenced Ashton Kutcher's prank show Punk'd, and this feels like it was elaborately doing this to everyone who saw that deleted scene. It's just so silly. Otherwise, one of my favorite videos on YouTube is the bad lip reading video of High School Musical. If you've never seen it, it's basically the same thing. There is plenty of material to do here. It's a shame that they only did this one instead of making it a series. I'd love to see more of that version of High School Musical. Seriously, I'd even buy physical media of it. Make it happen. High School Musical 1 is silly, fun trash, and the second one is a bit less of what made the first one have its charm. With that said, the third one could actually be the best in the series. It still maintains that level of charm and fun, and like the trashiness I liked earlier, but I don't really know what they're doing to Sharpay's character, because she slowly changed from a character I like specifically because she sees herself as this Queen Bee type, where in reality she's an overdramatic theatre kid, that nobody really saw her as the Queen Bee, at least not in the first movie. But she does have some of the wildest moments in this one, like a double-sized pink locker complete with padding, and she has an assistant like she's Meryl Streep in The Devil Wears Prada. The problem is that everyone else now kind of sees her as the Queen Bee. With that said, this is probably the first time what was being talked about was simultaneously, like, not in this bizarro Disney high school world like the first one, and the second one had Troy be loved bomb like he's in a cult by rich people. So that has me not care at all about the drama they're pushing a lot of the time. I'm not saying that this still isn't a bizarro Disney high school world, but what they talk about is that it's the senior year and they're all about to go their separate ways and adapt to the change. I'll admit that the massive change and going in different directions happens, and it's a bit intimidating to have this happen. So in actuality, this actually has something real to say about high school and the experiences, save for generic be yourself message. I know this is a weird thing to say, but despite it maintaining that distance with reality, does have this discussion, and it actually makes sense. While I wouldn't say this completely invalidates it from being trashy fun, it's still got something worthwhile. I'd actually recommend this for people who are trying to teach their children about those fears while still distilling them. Everyone goes their separate ways, and that's okay. I wouldn't recommend this for adults aside from nostalgic reasons or making fun of it, as these movies are easy to make fun of, but I don't think it's that bad. Here was where I could have stopped things and gone back to the first DCOM that had a franchise getting made out of it, which was the plan going forward, but there is another High School Musical movie. This one I had reservations about, and it's called Sharpay's Fabulous Adventure. You could argue that I was being lenient to the other High School Musical movies, and while I may have a lot of points to agree with when it comes to that, I'll at least argue that these movies operate like they're in their own little world. They have fun little moments that make you think, what the hell is this? But in a way that kind of sort of charmed me. They're not good, but I'd argue that there is a place for trashy fun like the trilogy, and they do work in what they're setting out to do, even if I'm more of the age group that makes fun of movies like this. Sharpay's Fabulous Adventure shares none of the qualities that its predecessors have. The thing is that High School Musical 1, 2, and 3, for all their problems, I wasn't bored. I was actually raptured by the silly little world they take place in. Not only is this movie not a musical, but it feels incredibly low budget. I know I just came off the high budget theatrical release, but if you look at High School Musical 1 and 2, there is some small amount of effort put into the look and the feel, whereas the director of this doesn't look like he knows how to shoot dance choreography. In the final scene, it's outright blocking the lead, and it's too cluttered in its presentation. I feel like this should be a bit like an action scene. There has to be technique as to how the camera is used. Yeah, this is to me that went to film school talking. Yeah, I'm a film school graduate. I'll give credit to Kenny Ortega, the director of the other three, in that he also had a hand in the choreography, and despite it looking silly at times, I can't really fault it on a level where I can say that what I'm looking at was bad, purely from the choreography and how it's shot point of view. Otherwise, this is about Sharpay being given a month by her father to make it big in Broadway or go home and work in the country club, which I assume is the same one from 2, because Sharpay's parents are the only returning cast members in this movie. It's basically she wants to be a star, but not really. It's her dog they want, so she tries making it in the big city. And of course, there's someone worse than her that's also Sharpay's idol, but she goes through the movie finding out her hero is really awful, that roles aren't just given, no matter how much talent you may have. Yet she's the underdog that we're rooting for because in the other 3 movies, she was at best comedic relief to laugh at, and at worst the person doing underhanded stuff to sabotage anyone else getting her theatre goals done. I really don't know what teenager would be thinking. I remember High School Musical. This was the first one in 4 years with only one returning cast member and none of the charm of the originals. Sign me up. They kind of give her an arc, but because this is still Disney Channel original movie, the idea that she would sacrifice her chances at stardom to show how awful the beloved lead is doesn't hold weight, considering that this, of course, ends with her getting the role. Also, people have been mocking the first 3 of these movies for just having a song in your heart, beating hard work and dedication. However much merit that has, this movie being low budget means that world that I've referenced a billion times is gone, and it outright has her love interest, future Oscar nominee Austin Butler. I have to bring up that someone in the worst High School Musical movie got nominated for an Oscar, because you have to start somewhere, saying that he liked her more when she just expected a leading part rather than actually working and doing what it takes. And the moral is that he's right. I'm going to keep arguing that High School Musical 1, 2, and 3 don't take place in our world. They take place in a weird distillation of it. A world where you could sing a number perfectly after playing half a basketball game and sprint to the hall, or where Sharpay, through her family, is the country club Karen despite still being a teenager. This doesn't take any effort in its presentation to do anything like that, so this is just where that idea of a song in your heart saving the day, your career, whatever, falls apart and really sends a horrible message. The others, I'll argue, has a be yourself message, even if the means it takes opens the door to this. This doesn't have that, so people in my age group that stopped after the first one, it got way, way worse. Now we officially have a clean slate and I don't have to talk about High School Musical anymore. Thank God for that. Next is pure 90s Halloween for kids cheese with Halloweentown, starring Debbie Reynolds and directed by the editor of Return of the Jedi and Twin Peaks of all things. If you've ever seen Hocus Pocus and Casper, you've basically got down the tone for this movie, except with less of a budget, so if you like those movies, I'd be confident in throwing this out there. Anyway, my observations, they love doing the mouth-gaping reaction shots in this movie. It almost feels like a commercial. With that said, the practical effects are where this movie really shines. Kind of. There's a skeleton cab driver, and I don't know how these attempts to make it expressive looked in 1998, but now it's a little uncanny valley. Otherwise, this is about the grandmother of a family being a witch from Halloweentown, and the three kids overhear a conversation and follow her there and learn about this place of wonder and all that stuff. I don't know how many people have watched my Christmas movies video, but I said this about the movie Prancer. Sam Elliott does snap at her a bunch of times, so maybe this would play out differently on my perspective if I was a kid. But it's the stuff like wandering off in the middle of nowhere and outright skipping half a school day to look after the reindeer, which he doesn't know about. I'm completely on his side. Well, unlike Sam Elliott's character, I really don't get the mother's insistence on keeping the kids tethered to Earth. It's not like death is the end there, so that risk is gone. The moral being that they're both to blame, but that I don't think that gels. If you tell children, especially teenagers, that they can't do something and not offer any explanation for it, of course they're going to end up running directly into it. Otherwise, its 90s-ness is kind of overwhelming, with the punk kid who somehow looks and acts nothing like what they're going for, the nerd that is obsessed with the reality of nature, science, obeying authority, just the kind of characters that the 90s wrote that would never happen. The whole idea is that these kooky characters aren't all that bad, that Halloweentown, despite their oddities, are really nice people, and okay, I sense that every movie going forward is going to have something akin to a be yourself message. Personally, I am charmed by Debbie Reynolds' performance as the grandmother. It really holds the whimsy of this together. The other thing I have to mention is that there's a twist villain. You know, the kind of thing Disney either gets loved or hated for doing, and I bring this up not only because Halloweentown 2 flat out reveals who it is in the title, but he introduces himself as the town mayor and summons a lollipop to offer the youngest. For what's ostensibly this is the thing that's supposed to throw you off track, it really has far worse connotations for the characters than being the evil wizard that wants to throw the people of Halloweentown back to the world of the living and take over. With that said, I do like one bit of foreshadowing. He has this crow thing both when they enter his office and when the punk kid leads Debbie Reynolds to his evil movie theater lair. Yes, he has a movie theater lair. It might need upkeep, but he can put on whatever he wants in the film projection booth. Either way, I just thought it was cool that the detail was added so anyone astute enough can see that he's the bad guy and not some product of, let's be fair here, absolutely terrible age. I'll be fair and say that this may be reinforcing that don't take candy from strangers idea without telling why, but the witches from 8 years prior already did that far better. I said in my first video on movies that I'm not going to criticize something when that's the point they're getting across, it's just that I think that's unclear here. Halloweentown 2 Kalabar's Revenge was the second time while watching these movies that I was just bored. The plot this time is that instead of going to Halloweentown and something's wrong, this time it's Kalabar having a kid off screen in the first movie because, go with it. Part of his motivation in the first movie was that the mother chose a mortal over him, so following in his father's footsteps, this kid decides to create two spells at once. One that turns everything in Halloweentown human and grey, and the other turning the humans into their costumes. Their Halloween costumes. This kid as a villain, by far the worst I've seen for this video so far. He just makes advances because I guess making those kinds of advances work with Gaston, making him contemptible, but the difference is that this is like Gaston hitting on Belle during the mob song. It's the kind of thing where you just kind of feel that's only something that would happen in something like this. I don't really know what it is he's doing. His father wanted to dominate the human world, and this is some bizarre not switch up. It has to have something aside from being evil. There's also this thing, he kind of seduces the lead into having her open the magic door to her grandmother's room and shows him the spell book that can't be touched when she only knew him for about 10 minutes. The funny thing is that, save for pretending normalcy with his frog dad, he has a fake dad made out of frogs. At least this is better for the actor than the Highlander sequels he was roped into. He could have just gained her trust over the year-long gap before the portal will be opened, meaning that Halloweentown has a portal that only opens on Halloween and closes after, meaning that while this is a nostalgia bomb to many, this is not a good first act. Next to High School Musical 2, I'm debating in my head as to which one has the worst first act. However, one of my biggest problems with this movie involves the lore. I feel like this is too nerdy getting hung up over the lore in a Disney Channel original movie, but trust me, if you hear me out, it's all going to make sense. Due to trying to find loopholes in the spell, Marnie, the main character of these movies, decides to go back in time to before the spell was cast, to look for the spell book that drives the plot. The thing is that not only is this very much a thing that can just happen, but they can go as far back as caveman times. That's not what I'm hung up on. What I am hung up on is that the entire plot at the end of it hinges on finding and reversing both spells before midnight, because in both movies, once the clock strikes midnight, Halloweentown has no transportation to the human world. It's never explained why this has a ticking clock element. Doctor Who, for instance, can't do stuff like this for multiple reasons, from debate as to the range of the TARDIS travel, missing by billions of miles or hundreds of years, the idea that they can't interfere timelines they've seen and know, so they can't just stop the European slave trade because they've seen the consequences of it and their actions in the stories lead to their own consequences that have to be played out, how the TARDIS typically gets put in a situation where the Doctor can't get to it until the end of the story, but nobody else can get in. Yeah, there's a lot. Either way, I don't know what the midnight rule is even there for. It's not like they can't just go back to 5 minutes ago. That's literally the first time she uses it. Otherwise, everything is competent, I guess. The practical effects on the monsters are nowhere near as prevalent as they were the first time. Debbie Reynolds doesn't have that interjection of whimsy that she gave the first one. So this just shaves off the stuff I enjoyed about the first one and replaces it with nonsensical villains and time travel. This is also probably because it came out in 2001, but it doesn't have the charm of either the first movie or High School Musical, and so it's just I feel it's like this awkward in-between. Remember how I said they had less and less of the good stuff I liked in the first one? Well, Halloweentown High doesn't even have prosthetic makeup half the time. The plot is just the kind of thing that has me question everything for the worse. It's about the citizens of Halloweentown being invited to schooling, except nobody knows what's going on in the human world, and the fear of what's going on among actually going to the human world is based on the Knights Templar instead of something like a werewolf going for a night stroll and being shot by a farmer that thinks he killed Bigfoot. There's no sense of these people being Halloween creatures save for skin suits, but none of that is taken advantage of. These are coming up, but even Zombies had some level of effort in its art design to convey this by just looking at them, even if they pass for human. Otherwise, the idea about people saying and doing stuff that's weird to the humans because they're monsters, the monsters getting offended at Halloween decorations, that and the whole idea of blending into the humans just creates this idea that this integration and breaking down barriers of prejudice is just not a thing when you consider what that they're really not doing any of that for most of the movie, and then being dropped into this without any explanation for human customs and how this idea is not only a really bad one, but it's kind of asking for every major piece of conflict in the movie. Like revealing themselves, take it or leave it, would have caused less problems. Also, it appears Lucas Grabeel from High School Musical is in this, I think I pronounced that right, and also plays the theatre kid. Also, so is Alicia Rulin, whatever. She, however, isn't defined by her ability to play the piano, though. Oh, and this ending, that humans have progressed, is a last-minute thing, and this happens after an angry mob gets talked down. It's the kind of naivety towards this that I expected, and I just think for an everything's preachy happy ending, that this ending, just this ending, has ramifications about how the world reacts to this that I would have preferred watching. Like, a school just learned that witches, werewolves, trolls, ogres, and pixies exist, and when that happens, the movie's over. Maybe I have too much of an adult mind to take this, to take the ending as it was, but considering I wasn't massively into what came before, I feel like this needs repeating. Return to Halloweentown, I'm convinced only exists due to Harry Potter. It's about a magical university that Marnie and her brother go to and learn all about the supernatural. It feels the most pointless, and I think the reason for that is that Sarah Paxton is the new Marnie and Kimberly J. Brown got recast. The thing is that looking into this, she was apparently available to shoot. The even weirder thing is that every other actor who has a reprised role reprises their role. I'm not mad at this, as I have no strong feelings towards Kimberly J. Brown's acting, but I always thought this was bizarre when franchises did this. Even worse in places like here when there's no explanation. Otherwise, while I didn't enjoy Halloweentown 2 and 3, this one starts with a prophecy that something big and scary is out there and the bad guys want it. It's an amulet that can literally control people. If you're only knowing about these movies through my video, then I'll say that no, there is nothing in the previous 3 movies that says that they have a prophecy. It's even weirder because time travel is in this one again, and don't you think that if you can time travel, that instead of prophesizing, you can just check? It also gets worse. Debbie Reynolds is barely in this, and there is only 2 or 3 prosthetics in the movie. I told you it gets worse and worse, and this just feels like what happens when you cross Bewitched with the worst witch, except magic isn't allowed. Yeah, in a magic school, magic isn't allowed. It also has 3 over-the-top Queen Bee characters, but unlike Sharpay from the first High School Musical movie, there was at least something to the character that had me enjoy that extreme cognitive dissonance between her thinking she's the top of the range in popularity and really being an awkward, egotistical, overdramatic teacher's pet that was effortless to make not cool. There was at least something to which I enjoyed. It got a little screwy in the sequels, but point is that it's there. Here, they don't even say something hilariously bad. Lastly, I haven't been bringing this up, but each sequel made a new way of communicating across realms each time. This time it's literally any bowl of water can cause people to talk to each other, including toilets. It just makes things awkward if you went to the wrong place.
They're years ahead of us!
Mom, Lace, check it out! Dad's on TV!
Oh, yeah!
Zenon, Girl of the 21st Century, is the second ever Disney Channel franchise, and right off the bat, I do like the set design, making it feel like a mix of The Facility and Alex Mack and Deep Space Nine. Granted, while the costumes are a little laughable, do you think the star's coming back in 25 years? I don't mind this getting stuff wrong. The teen slang oozes, how do you do, fellow kids? I feel like we should have a count of how many times I play that clip, because so far I'm being extremely restrained. Only going for it once per issue. I guess the audience at the time thought that these words would be slang. I bring this up because the movie kind of never stops with it. Okay, Zenon. The premise is that Zenon is a 13-year-old troublemaker on the space station conducted entirely for research and a schooling system for the young ones. You guys can put all this into space, yet not another couple dozen VR headsets.
It needs your eyes. Virtual Boy. See it now in 3D.
Oh, right, the Virtual Boy. Well, just something aside from spying on people and unsupervised spacewalks. Anyway, an evil billionaire comes all sugary sweet to the others, but Zenon doesn't buy it. And while trying to expose him, she gets caught instead of his one guy. He can't evil billionaire have multiple fall guys, so there's deniability when you get caught. Also, no talking about your insurance fraud in public hours before that happens. Anyway, she's grounded on Earth where everything looks like the late 90s. They didn't even try here. So she has a hard time fitting in, despite what I'm assuming would be hundreds of questions about space. Oh, and the cliche that wasn't around as much in Halloweentown, it was in 3 and 4, that is, back here is the boyfriend with a large part of his role saying, no really, you're special, because it doesn't matter if you're from space, a witch, a science genius, or someone who's able to get working on a Broadway production in about a day after landing in Manhattan, you need validation. I guess just like every other action hero from the 90s and prior needed to suck face with the closest woman. Both are silly and stupid, but for their own reasons. Honestly, my favourite part of this movie is that she has to get back to the station due to plot and goes with her idols. Apparently in 25 years, the most popular band is going to look like this. That's not the funny part. The funny part is that she just says she's a fan of his, and that causes him to literally be on her side against the evil billionaire, who's commissioned them to perform there. More than that, he talks his non-fall guys that are outside his control to not pursue Zenon any further. That right there is the unreality I love in these movies, especially when you decide to watch stuff like up this far back. Moments like this catch you off guard rather than being everywhere in High School Musical. Some British rock star who wanted to cross Super Saiyan with frosted tips giving a 10-second speech about living life in a way that's rock and roll is the biggest thorn in the villain's side. Seriously, if it wasn't for him, this billionaire would have killed thousands. Otherwise, it's not as laughable as High School Musical, yet there isn't that much that had me invested in it enough to think that it's alright beyond its flaws like the first Halloweentown. There is the set design, and I guess it's mostly okay, but there are other pieces of kids' media just like this. A lot of them are not even restricted by it being a 1999 live-action TV movie that does stuff like this better. However, Zenon 2, the Zequel, just when I thought this series couldn't get any more how do you do, fellow kids, I'm calling it a sequel. Nobody is calling that outside of just saying the title. Considering the repetition of High School Musical, I didn't think that it would have started this far back. Zenon is still a troublemaker that's a well-intentioned thorn on the side of the authority figures around her, because that was in the first movie. She has to be guided to different places by different authority figures that just want her out of the way, because it was in the first movie, but it turns out there's this big thing going on that only she can do, and somehow ends up saving the space station, and it somehow involves that rocket guy she's crushing on. Because, first movie. I'll be clear on this. This isn't gonna be a strike against these movies, because I'll be fair and say that I'm a Godzilla fan, and most of those movies have Godzilla taking a sweet-ass time to get to Japan, there being no effort to evacuate, and somehow believing that the solution to a giant destructive monster is yet another giant destructive monster. If it's something I find entertaining, I totally get the appeal, even through its repetition, and Zenon 2, I'm not the audience for this. The predictions for the 2050s slang is still cringy, and a lot of the conflict now is based on stuff like Zenon finding legit alien signals, and nobody believing her. That works for me getting frustrated at the authority figures, so good job there, I guess. Otherwise, the evil billionaire from the last movie doesn't come back, but the space station is otherwise a death trap, so they have to ground everyone piece by piece, and Zenon, and not Raven-Symoné. She was in the first movie, but apparently Dr. Dolittle 2 got conflicted with this. I'll say that like Halloweentown 4, both actors are fine, but I do appreciate this time that it's easy to look up and find out why this happened. Anyway, these two can play Pong with the airlock controls for some reason. The villain this time is a general that's also the father of the bully in the first movie. Apparently, Daddy's Girls tied to a power imbalance in the hero's life is the one villain the Disney Channel can create over and over, but apparently this time her acting like she does is because of all that moving around. And Zenon's mother has to get over her anxieties when her aunt did that in the last movie, and apparently aliens are real. Also, aliens giving you a tow job and a translucent LED-style stingray flying over the station isn't proof, according to the general. With that said, the most bizarre plot point really is that the aliens are trying to contact Zenon through the lyrics of her favourite rock star in order to get her to download a map and get taken to God knows where to talk to her and her alone, telepathically. I guess it's more of that protagonist has to be special thing. I get why it's here for demographics, but not thematically. I don't think there is any real reason for the aliens to only want to contact Zenon. Otherwise, the space station has better sets than before, yet they still look like 2001 on Earth, and when there isn't any slang, stuff like Zenon's parents talking about overcoming anxiety, or Zenon's mother telling her about the surprises of having children and the anxiety that she's been facing throughout the movie when it comes to her staying on the space station, I get the feeling that this could have been better than what it is, because these scenes are actually good. The rest is mostly a meh thing to put on for your children. The bad stuff is worse here, so I'm not exactly giving this a positive review, but this also is the first time that this is actually a trilogy, meaning I only have one movie to go, so only one more movie of cringeworthy slang written by some middle-aged executive trying to predict how kids are going to talk in 50 years. So far, it's definitely the most cringeworthy thing I've seen for this video so far. Yet. So thankfully, Z3 is the last. But after watching Z3, I can see why. Let's go back to the first movie, because these series have this habit of having me dig up the previous entries to say, look at how much better this movie was, and so far the best these have gotten is okay, unless you count dumb, trashy fun. Zenon in the first movie actually had a character that wasn't what this movie did. Remember how the aliens were specifically sending out messages to the tune of her favourite pop star to get her and only her to contact them? That's the jump the shark moment of this series for me. Between Sharpay's fabulous adventure being a low-budget non-musical continuation and Return to Halloweentown, Anne's magic object of great importance, this is actually a record for how fast this has happened in one of these franchises. Why do I bring this up? Because in this, Zenon, and only Zenon, is the conduit of magic space ghosts on the moon. And I'll sort of go into more detail later. It actually gets worse than that. The whole vibe has completely changed to the point where Zenon has a 10-year-old sidekick hero worship her to the point of imitating her. She has a tragic backstory, and Zenon is the one guiding light in her life. Zenon also being the only person aliens are interested in, and the bully character from the first two movies, now friends, being openly jealous and outright acknowledging that she wins everything, and this framing and worshipping the ground she stands on when she's not literally getting supernatural aid. When you consider all this, plus the role Raven-Symoné was recast back into a original role, and now she has a sister that's friends with Zenon, and while I'm fine with CGI made for TV 2004 looking like this, it's a huge amount of this movie. This really feels like one last milking the name rather than one last hurrah. Raven-Symoné was a big star on the Disney Channel around this time, so I'm sure her having a few cameos on a green screen would have drawn in people who didn't know what Zenon was, and you're left with the most stale-feeling movie I've looked at thus far. Also, they recast the British rock star. Also, not only is this girl the first contact with aliens, but she is the only point of mediation between humanity building condos on the moon and the literal goddess of the moon. Seriously, this is where the supernatural aid comes from, because instead of simply appearing before the people who were having these colonies on the moon and saying that she can alter gravity, somehow any of the godlike things you can give her license to do, she has to talk to Zenon. Not only that, but she's able to summon snowfall in space, so this is a pretty top contender for the most nonsensical plot thus far. Also, I didn't think it was worth mentioning, but despite none of these movies being musical, it ends with the rock star performing the standard "This is the end of a decom, we're happy now" thing. I say this because while I'm not going to check, mainly because watching these movies already eviscerated what little reputation I had left among my family and friends, the disturbing movies just scared them away. I have the feeling that this was where this came from, and probably led to these movies becoming musicals so frequently. Otherwise, the only one of these movies, like Halloweentown, I'm halfway towards recommending, is the first one. The major problem with a lot of these is that they're just not a lot of silly fun to have me let the bad stuff slide, but in this pre-figuring out identity phase of the Disney Channel, at least the identity they're more than happy with evolving and continuing, I only have 5 movies left. To start with, the Cheetah Girls. While this series kind of has the overlap with what I'll call my generation's era, which is just High School Musical and Camp Rock, I don't hear this get talked about nearly as much. Probably because 90s decom kids were mostly talking about Halloweentown, and 2000s decom kids were talking about High School Musical. However, maybe it was just me, but I kind of jumped into this movie with no context for what was going on, like I did with all of these movies. However, I feel like this is the first one which may need some background to actually get into with the reactions to this movie, because to me, as someone who wasn't a fan of how repetitious the music biopic struggling band overcomes their parents and a record producer that wants them to dive headfirst into shedding the image through one means or another, one gets a big head, then through circumstances they all reunite, this movie is kind of exactly the same as any of those movies. The problem is that the Cheetah Girls is a very real band at the time, and this was seen as a blatant cash grab by Disney. Considering that I had to find this information out, they clearly don't have the same staying power as anyone else that had a biopic made of them, which is probably why it gets eviscerated on IMDb, for example. The other thing is that this is also based on a series of books, so this is a movie based on a book that was then cynically spun off into a band. They have a Christmas album, so if you want me to listen to that this Christmas, blow this video up with engagement. And I'm gonna attract people that just want to see me suffer through these movies, so if you're disappointed, just do that. The advantage that all of this has is that after listening to people try to be rock stars pandering to 8-year-olds in the Zenon movies, I'm actually more okay with the band doing it for a living, because while the music isn't great, it's better than a good majority of the other soundtracks thus far. Maybe with the exception of like the High School Musical movies or something like that. I can't really rank them. None of them are that great. The other thing is that while there isn't a lot of really dumb plot here, individual scenes... Yeah, I do keep bringing these to the forefront when talking about these movies, but I don't really care. I have to give credit where and when I think it's due. The individual scenes are actually fine. Stuff like one of them being a foster child and then getting confronted on her lying because she feels inadequate next to her better supported bandmates whose mothers didn't give up on them, and Raven finding out just caving into the record producer because he's a big name having consequences. This is the outcome of a really stupid decision, but these scenes actually feel organic. They're trying to make it less sellouty than all of this stuff around it sounds. But that said, this is more of that awkward in-between Halloweentown and High School Musical in terms of tone, except it's way more leaning towards being like High School Musical, because there's still a lot of weird, cringy stuff, but that I think has its charm, even if it's at odds with the good stuff I described earlier. That, and it feels like there are scenes missing because they have rivals or bullies. It was really hard to tell at first because they make fun of them using elephant noises, and I really don't know why. And one of them just becomes Raven's boyfriend halfway through with no progression. Also, this editing and filmmaking techniques for the music videos is so early 2000s, it's actually pretty jarring. With that said, when you get past what's around it, this is probably one of the better movies I've looked at thus far. It's still not good, and there's still a lot of work to be done before I can call any of these movies, with the probable exception of the first Halloweentown, good. But considering what is around it, and the demographic being 8-year-olds, this could have been far worse than what it ended up being. With that said, if there's any motif, it's the not terrible first movie getting progressively worse sequels, so I'm at least glad there isn't a Cheetah Girls 4. Cheetah Girls 2, I am worrying that the further I'm getting into these, the less fair I am on them. With that said, I think if you enjoyed the first Cheetah Girls movie, then I really don't have that many complaints, all things considered. Yeah, I didn't think this would break that mold, but here we are. There is some really contrived stuff, like how they enter the talent show in Spain is very... You should suspend your disbelief for this. Otherwise, this is probably the strongest sync entry thus far, purely because of that. I can see people who enjoyed the first one liking this. Otherwise, there's still some stuff worth talking about, like the fact the foster child gets a validating boyfriend that's a count, meaning this is one of the few times where this trope doesn't just feel like wish fulfillment to the target audience. There's nothing wrong with that in theory, but it's just that when you've seen enough of these movies in a row, your tolerance for these tropes get worse. Especially because my two biggest problems with them were that they were being used on literal witches and girls that ended up talking to aliens and moon goddesses, needing a bland guy to say that she's special, and the fact that these boyfriends, with the exception of Troy Bolton, don't really have a character beyond just making her happy. It still has that problem, considering the only thing outside of that which defines him is his family's broken, he likes to dance, but it's still far better than the previous times it's been used. With that also said, it's shot in Barcelona, and say what you want about Kenny Ortega, I can say a lot of things about his Rocky Horror thing, but he does know how to shoot dance choreography. Those two things combined makes this one of the better looking movies I've covered thus far, except maybe in the costume design. Who thought I can't decide on short shorts or jeans, so I'll go with both was a good idea. With that said, I also have to tell you guys how it decides to rehash the plot of the first movie, with the running into hiccups that almost broke up the band's chance at winning a contest, as well as possibly the band period, only to reunite with the power of being yourself and family. In the first one, it's the sellout record producer. In this, it's getting sucked into how awesome it is that they're actually in Spain and going into vacation mode instead of rehearsing. So, yeah, they rehashed the first movie while also putting some reason as to why they're doing it in a way that actually makes sense. Otherwise, the only thing worth talking about is while Cheetah Girls 1 is very music-centered, it wasn't an outright musical, whereas this is. From being a musical to not being one, and from not being a musical to being one, it's a bizarre change to make across a series. However, while I've never really been a fan of these soundtracks, I will reiterate that it's not exactly a deal-breaker save for how these songs are used. I'll explain. Look at High School Musical, and the songs in that movie aren't just serving the purpose of how these characters are feeling at any given situation, but it's extremely on the nose with, what purpose it serves in the plot. Something like the Cheetah Girls' fear of being broken up, hence the trip to Spain, isn't given a song, yet how awesome Barcelona has a song, and it's just bizarre because I haven't seen a musical operate like this. Other than that, if you like the first one, then this isn't exactly a deal breaker to watch either. Personally, I thought it was mixed, however, it's not like I'd be expecting an amazing movie after one that's only okay on the Disney Channel. Okay, now this is the second series in a row that's a trilogy that features Raven-Symoné and her leaving one of them. From my understanding, she hated working with the other three members of the cast. The way she tells it, her being a bigger name than the other three really created a rift. Plus, she also double-dipped as being producer of the second one, and she just decided to opt out of the series. This kind of has this snowball effect where it's like, this is the worst one, not even a competition, because when you really break it down, these movies, whether you like them or not, are about the unity of family and a group of something. So seeing that one has already left when it's just started. I criticized the first movie for having a falsity to it when you dig around what's going on, but this doesn't even need digging around. It's right in front of you. So the plot is that the Cheetah Girls are trying to keep themselves afloat and get a call to be in a Bollywood movie, and they all audition, but the director wants all three, despite there only being one part, and doesn't tell them until they get to India. So this is just a rehash of the second movie, except I was more than confident to recommend the second movie to people who like the first. I wasn't a big fan of the first, but still, save the previous one. The previous ones have their moments. This one isn't that at all. It doesn't have crazy moments, save for a dance-off in the middle of production, and some of it can really be boiled down to being sad that they're going to go their separate ways and the Cheetah Girls are breaking up. Now that last one may have some people rushing to say, wait a second, didn't you enjoy High School Musical 3 for something similar? No. See, the anxiety about the future in High School Musical is central, and it's about the transition from high school to the real world. Real world for those movies anyway. It distills a relatable conversation to be palatable to 12-year-olds. This is about your singing girl group going halfway around the world and potentially breaking up. That conversation is just not something a great majority of the planet can relate to. How many Bollywood movies have you auditioned for accidentally? So it takes a conversation I've already covered in one of these movies, but worse, and the rest of the movie... Remember how I said that High School Musical is a fluff show, but a fluff show being boring is worse than it being bad? Well, I called that shot, didn't I? There really isn't that much to talk about, like the mother's grounding them to reality somewhat. Like, I get Ravens is not here, but the other one isn't here either. It just went from you need to negotiate to sign a record deal and go to Spain to you can literally fly from Manhattan to India and never acknowledge whether your parents notice. This is my favorite series I've covered thus far, but I still feel disappointed considering how steep the fall was between movies. Witches was the series whose sequel for a long time marked the death of the non-musical on the Disney Channel. This is another Halloween one, so think of the tone being like the Halloweentown sequels, except this is actually better than them. This is about twin sisters born in a magical world that is being taken over by an entity called the Darkness, and they had to be separated at birth and sent to Earth to hide from it because they're both marked for death because of an ancient prophecy that they have the power to stop the darkness. I can confirm that no, in the movie, the Darkness does not believe in a thing called love. I'll admit that these twins do have chemistry, and as a twin myself, one of the things that I keep seeing people get wrong is that while my brother and I are close, we are our own people with our own ideas. If you go over my other movie videos, my brother that I mentioned is my twin, so if you get an idea as to how it can diverge, there you go. It's not like I'm going to be offended or anything, but Fred and George Weasley, for instance, are always side by side, and they are both pranksters whose only separating feature is that one is dead. I don't like Harry Potter in general, but even then, considering how they're written, the end result is so what about that death? It's bad character writing. Twitches directly remedies this. Save them talking in unison, I don't think I've ever done that. Each twin feels like a character, and they have agency and disagreements that do define both of them as their own being. So well done, Disney Channel original movie, you're better than Harry Potter. I'll admit it's a bit odd coupley at times, so its representation I think is mixed to good. Okay, in terms of what I liked, well, the jokes actually have a far better hit rate than in the previous movies. I did actually laugh a couple of times here, from relatable humour to character-driven humour, while also never really sacrificing likability in the process. Not every joke hits, but it's leagues above everything else I've talked about. At least in the realm of stuff I know for 100% sure was intentionally creating those jokes. I said the dynamic of the twins was odd-coupley earlier, and while it may have its problems when you go over this with a fine-tooth comb, it actually does create organic comedy. I said it was mixed to good. That, and I also like the scene where Alex, yes, one of the twins is called Alex, reunites with her mother after all this time, and I do like that they go crazy with their magic power once they realize that they have it to pull pranks on people and have fun. The other thing I have to mention is the handling of adoption. In the 90s in particular, they had this very weird habit of painting the step-parents as being antagonistic, even if they did nothing wrong. So I am actually going to point out that Alex's dead stepmother is actually this big deal for her throughout the plot. Like, she doesn't really care that she's not her real mother. They still had a loving relationship, and she is still grieving. I just thought that was cool. It's a solid movie with maybe one or two cringeworthy moments at most, and very product of its place and time with its CGI. With that said, it's definitely the best thing I've watched for this video so far. While for a predominantly younger crowd, this is actually something that isn't too bad, even for adults, if you want a safe and no real problems piece of escapism. The CGI is very dated by today's standards, but if I timed the releases correctly, I already did a few rants on why TV from back then had terrible CGI, and why that wasn't really the fault of the people making it. So off that, I don't know if this is due to them making more High School Musical-centric things, but we never got a Twitches 3. However, considering that this was probably the one I liked the most, clicking play on the next one made me think, please don't suck. Thankfully, while it does continue the trend of being worse than its predecessor, Twitches 2 is only in the slightest of ways. In fact, I can see people who enjoyed the first one being disappointed that there isn't a Twitches 3. This one is about the girls trying to get the hang of their magic on their own, while also there's this thing from a place called the Shadowlands that could be the Darkness or the twist villain from the last one, but Alex is unconvinced and thinks that it may be their long-lost father, so their movie is about the conflict between Alex, their mother, and Cam stuck in the middle trying to work things out. I don't think I commented on the set design of the first Twitches movie, at least the Coventry parts, but I do like the set designs. It looks like an actual castle rather than an imitation of one. That, and while there isn't any payoff, I do like Cam's adopted parents saying that Alex could call them mum and dad if she wants and stuff like that. With that said, the comedy is worse. I did laugh maybe once or twice, but I laughed a little more regularly in the first one. That, and there's a twist ending to what's actually going on, and if you think it's somehow the villain returns from the last movie and both the villain and the father are still alive, you'd be correct. Honestly, I just said I wouldn't go into spoilers, but I don't think there's a single decom without a villainous figure. Everyone in that movie was misguided up until that point. If anything, so of course there's a villain. But I do think that one of my biggest complaints with this is, while the first movie took effort to explain just how different the twins were, and this was their social and economic standing, Alex has her own character still, but it feels like she lives with Cameron's family and none of her friends or foster family show up. They're not even mentioned, and it's just bizarre to me that they did that. I guess it's due to plot stuff and having to keep it under 85 minutes or something. Either way, it's strange. With that said, this is still the best series so far. And now, we are officially all caught up with Disney Channel movie franchises between Halloweentown and High School Musical. At this point, there are hidden gems, and I know that this is already exceeding the length of my other movie videos, but I know there are several movies beyond this point that you're going to want me to see. Camp Rock was the last Disney Channel thing that came out and tried a hype train when I was still in grade school. I think even when taking into account my bias that I outlined at the beginning of this video, my thoughts back then were that Disney Channel was getting a huge success of High School Musical, and all of a sudden I see DVDs and hype for this on sale, and I was just thinking, wait a second, this just looks like High School Musical at camp. I didn't know who Demi Lovato or the Jonas Brothers were, and that kind of became how I saw it until I found a lot of cringe compilations getting made from it. Walking into this, I don't know whether I was expecting Easter to make fun of Fluff Show, diving into being funny and it's cringe like how I saw High School Musical, or if it actually gets really bad. But either way, I was looking forward to it, if only because I know people revel in this. Honestly, it wasn't a musical, which is weird, considering that this was seen as the next big thing to a series of musicals, but okay. I completely get why this is on so many cringe compilations. It seems to kind of borrow from all the decom cliches at once. Never mind the acting is very not good from the leads. I guess still, stylistically, while Halloweentown has that mouth gaping and amazement thing, like they're in a commercial, but the thing is that Demi Lovato kind of constantly acts like she's in a commercial. The Jonas Brothers have been ridiculed online for their acting in this before, and while I'm not the last one to do it, every line delivery is stilted and off. Otherwise, the plot is just tiring at this point. If you've heard this one before, please tell me. A teenager aspiring to be a rock star is obsessed with a summer camp for the rock stars, however she isn't economically viable enough to go there, until her mother lands a catering job there. Feeling inadequate at the Nepo babies and stage fright, she decides to lie through her teeth about who her parents are. And while this is going on, a teeny bopper with a bad boy image goes there to teach them to PR cleanup. If you're guessing this ends with the teenager friending yet the next spoilt little rich kid that feels threatened by the protagonist, there being breadcrumbs that people start following, leading them to find out the truth and humiliating her for it, her actually being the favourite to win in the eyes of the teeny bopper, though both don't know due to circumstance. And I feel like what makes this less fun than High School Musical, if this was trying to be the next big thing, is that I feel like they barely had an idea and decided to add the plot line about her lying about her mother and the teeny bopper and her knowing and her not knowing each other, and them not knowing, the two not knowing each other, and the latter Ada creates the "no, really, it's not me" as a means to delay things further, and the breadcrumbs of people getting to learn about the truth as this frustrating, good, now you know. And I know this is the target audience, but it's the kind of transparent lying that gets little kids, that little kids learn when they're older, that they really can't get away with. And the problem with watching this as an adult is they're getting found out. As a result of this, while the cringe is still there, it's nowhere near as fun. In fact, I'd argue that High School Musical's cringe is more of a funny, oh my god, they seriously betrayed reality like this, haha, plus ridiculous lines. However, this has plot that also has the kind of cringe that has me feel like I'm actively shriveling up while watching. Oh, and this one decides to do two finales, as in, unlike High School Musical 2, where there's a big love song where everyone dances along, and then there's this big finale, Ali. This has the big love song, a big dance number, and another big final song, and the final song, and it's basically the same song as Summer Belongs to You from Phineas and Ferb, but worse. Summer Belongs to You was an absolute blast, look that up. I feel like the only reason this existed was that reality TV was taking off, and this was back when you can be stars. All you have to do was impress absolute tools like Simon Cowell, who nobody would care about if they weren't doing this. So Disney was leaning in. They can release soundtrack albums and spin this off with a reality TV show that never went anywhere and a sequel. Considering this is the weakest first entry I've watched so far for this video, all 6 of them, and the sequels always get worse, I need to brace myself for Camp Rock 2, because even people who enjoy the first one don't like it, and it's kind of infamous for being the worst of these sequels. So, yeah, that's an extreme warning. The only idea they had for this was inserting more Jonas Brothers, and no, their acting skills do not improve between movies, and to create an evil alternative to Camp Rock called Camp Star, which is set up by the creepy teacher from the previous movie's former bandmate that got kicked out because he quote-unquote sold out. I played nice with the first Cheetah Girls movie, if only because when you don't have that context, that movie's another okayish decom by the standards of it being a decom. When I realised the standard, I adjusted. This one not only tries that, but adds the Camp Rock brand of cringe to it. It seems to conflate selling out with having money, which is amazing coming from Disney. I can't tell whether that's a confession or not, considering them trying to push AI art over the past year and a half. Yeah, I'm watching these movies, but I'm not going to let an opportunity to call them out pass me by. The more this goes on with stuff like the deepfakes and AI art, the more this company is indefensibly consolidated dogs. Plus, here's another problem. Because the Disney Channel doesn't know how to do their music without sounding poppy or go too bad when trying to vilify the people who supposedly just don't understand the music, man, the effect is that in order to distinguish them both, they make the ones we're supposed to hate just really, really flashy. Sharpay from High School Musical has showmanship skills, thus we should hate her. One of the Jonas Brothers complains about selling out in the last movie, and it's a risky new sound, and it's the same poppy stuff as before. The Cheetah Girls have a record producer that created a song that only sounds slightly different and asks them to wear crappy masks, and this breaks up the band because it's so different to their vision. Just imagine a whole movie that's basically this point. It's such an empty point. Oh, and also, they have professional recording studios and air conditioning. They must be evil. Also, Nick Jonas in this movie is a creep, like full-on spying on a girl he likes with binoculars. The movie tries to sell it as lovers torn apart by society or whatever, instead of getting a free restraining order, and she somehow responds to this. I will stop complaining and say there is one scene which I liked in this movie, and I only liked it due to the fact that it's definitely the hardest I've laughed at a movie for this video so far. But the context is that the Camp Rockers are a little angry about Camp Star practicing their first number for weeks when they first met, and Demi Lovato just performed out of her gained confidence from the previous movie. They decided to imitate them before challenging them, and the imitation is this.
It's about time. My private vocal lesson started 10 minutes ago.
Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot that Axel thinks you need the extra rehearsal.
Camp Rock! Camp Rock! Camp Rock! Camp Rock! Camp Rock! Camp Rock! Camp Rock!
Yeah, that's right. We're here on your stage. So you guys didn't really give us a chance to answer back the other night. But guess what? That's gonna change.
It also works. The other thing I liked is that the mean girl from the first movie is antagonistic again, but this time it's not just wanting to please her mother, it's her getting sucked into the world of Camp Star. So yeah, one cliche subversion for these movies instead of just repeating itself over and over. And one point where I was hysterically laughing. I'm not really sure how to talk about the worst sequels why I didn't like the first one, or if the one that just takes the steepest dive when compared to its predecessors would count as the worst. However, in terms of my overall experience, this probably takes the cake. I talked about High School Musical and how when I was younger I hated them. Now I think they're harmless and easy to make fun of fluff shows. While you could argue the same here, the difference is that this is boring and cringeworthy on a level the other stuff I talked about really aren't. Sharpay's Fabulous Adventure was boring, but at least I had nothing to cringe at. Zenon's slang was cringy, but I had something interesting to talk about when it came to those sequels. Halloweentown shaved off what I liked in them, but it at least had what I liked about them. So, that was horrible. I hated Camp Rock, and I'm glad that the series kind of fizzled out after this, because next is an entirely new generation of decom movie series that I haven't seen. My goal for this is simple. Ask the question of if these movies have the potential to match High School Musical and Halloweentown as those series that kids watching this channel will be nostalgic to in a few decades, and if so, what? To start with, The Descendents. My biggest problem with that is the messaging is confused. I'm Doug, Dopey's son. I'm Lonnie, my mother's Mulan. There's a lot of really stilted dialogue that has to point out where in the Disney princess thing they fit, and that's a bit of a problem when you consider that this not only has a be yourself message, I've genuinely lost count of how many times this is here, but also that you aren't defined by your parents. I also feel like this is like High School Musical in that you aren't meant to think about the ramifications of the plot points, like love potions and Evie potentially being Snow White's half-sister, yet getting banished to the island where the villains reside because she's the daughter of the evil queen from Snow White. The justifications for this range from non-existent to so flimsy that it dives into being really screwed up. I guess that's like tricking your friends to break up because you're worried about their other activities. Yeah, I didn't call that out when talking about High School Musical, but here it's a little more frequent. I guess the idea is that this is an attempt to be morally grey, but morally grey and Disney Channel is like Godzilla working construction. It's just so at odds with what this actually is. I'm betting that as kids watching this get older, they'll playfully call us out like the High School Musical generation does. With that said, this is another reason to make fun of fluff shows I laughed at. I don't think this is in any continuity with the animated movies that inspired it, mainly because the characters are charitably described as over the top and distilled. This is a story where the children are made to benefit or suffer due to who their parents are, and be blamed or rewarded for whatever they did. So clearly, these aren't the heroes of the animated movies. I do love the over-the-top villain acting, and the acting everywhere is over the top. So when it's going, it can actually be fun. The plot is a little all over the place, though. With that said, did they have to put Be Our Guest in this as a rap number? The rest of the music is the same Disney Channel stuff, which means that for me that it's listenable, but not exactly something I'll remember or like for that matter. But that's too much. For me, while it can be dumb fun, as in really dumb fun, some lines and plot points just really don't do it for me. Also, bland boyfriend whose sole purpose is to talk up the leading lady? Of course that's here, I'd be surprised if it wasn't. I wouldn't recommend this unless you actually like this cheesy stuff. I've seen people compare this unfavorably to Ever After High, but personally, I like reveling in how over the top this can be. Descendents 2. This movie has more confusion in its messaging about family, not just with the clunky dialogue I mentioned earlier, but by having Mulan's kid go through a subplot where she breaks down the gender norms and the stage combat stunt work class thing. And I just thought it'd be cool if it wasn't Mulan's daughter. More the theme that this series is trying to push. Also, the No Girls Loud rule has me more convinced that this isn't in continuity with those movies. Also, remember the screwed morality? This isn't as prevalent, however, what it does do is make me side completely with the bad guy. See, Ben, the son of the beast, planned on taking the fall in the first movie and progressing with more. However, he never followed through. Seriously, Ben's an idiot. I could say that about most of the characters, but this especially, and as such, the children of Ursula and Captain Hook are a little mad that 4 of their peers went to the magical paradise that they didn't. The movie itself acknowledges this somewhat, but what makes it worse is that it was Ben's idea, and nowhere near as played like a screw-up as it should have been. Ben's an idiot, I have to keep saying. Also, the number of rap numbers in this movie has increased between Camp Rock, High School Musical, and this, and not to criticize rap numbers in general, but when it's about how awesome you are or insulting someone, distilling it down to an audience as inoffensive as the Disney Channel demographic. None of the music I remember save for these, so they're pretty mediocre, at best. I do actually have another problem though, and that is the end of the second act is a climactic sword fight, and while this isn't what you'd expect for a finale for something like this, it feels like it is the finale, considering that there really isn't a lot of plot left, so finding out there's 40 minutes to go, I just think is really strange. I get the feeling that people who like this movie are probably going to jump on me for this, however no. It does still have the cheesy fluff. It does just set out for the cheesy fluff show, and the one thing I didn't give the previous movie credit for is that I do weirdly like the costumes. They also work for the big dance numbers with a lot of people going on. They're colourful and unique enough to easily telegraph who's there without them looking silly. Most of the time. That and while CGI work is still bad, which is confusing because I gave the CG work in the other movies I've talked about slack because of the time period. However, this came out in 2017, so it's painfully clear how little Disney values this. However, sets are fine, and I do like that half the time the actors are never the actors are over the top, and the other half, they're played straight. Also, like Cheetah Girls, if you enjoyed the first one, this is a fine sequel, with nothing overly worse. Just that the bad guy motivation just has me side with them until the third act love spell thing. But if Mal could do it and have no serious repercussions for it, then neither can the villains. I was planning on continuing the, hey, light-hearted fun angle I was going for with making this regardless of whether or not I enjoyed these movies, but unfortunately, Cameron Boyce, who played Carlos, the son of Cruella de Vil, died not long after Descendents 3 got released due to complications from epilepsy, and the movie is dedicated to his memory. You guys may have been writing comments about how insensitive I was when talking about the acting being over the top or something like that. Well, to clear that up, that's just a convention of the decom genre, which I personally love, and if you really want me to be honest, he was actually pretty good in these movies. He was only 20 years old, which is extremely unfortunate, considering I'd have liked to have seen him in more stuff and grow a prosperous career, whether he would have been shackled to the musical genre or even flexed with others. I also believe that the Descendents animated stuff would have probably been full-blown sequels, at least conceptually. Personally, I'd have been happier with the series if they just bowed out here. Now, you may think I'll go easier on this one, considering I do like Cameron Boyce and don't really want to upset anyone by saying it's not as good, when in actuality, I think the opposite. If it's dedicated to someone, then it really should be a good movie. In this case, by the standards of it being a sequel to Descendents, because to me, not to speak ill of the other people on board, but I feel like these people deserve it. Is it good? Actually, I think it's probably the strongest entry in the series. There honestly isn't any shaky morality stuff like the first two, and save for motivation. I think for what it is, the story's pretty good. It involves Audrey, Sleeping Beauty's daughter, and the first girlfriend to Ben before the love potion thing. And while she moved on pretty well in the first movie, hence why I said I didn't like the motivation, here it's an entirely different story. She steals the crown, Maleficent's scepter, and wreaks havoc. And because this is the first time a child of the good characters did stuff like this, sure Jan, they're quick to blame the new arrivals. Plus, Uma is back, and their gang teams up with Mal's, despite the uneasiness of the idea of the villains in the last movie. As in antagonistic force. The only thing Uma did wrong was the same thing as Mal, and I'm defending this. Joining and helping. Save the CGI being worse than a lot of the things you see on TV at the time, and the practical effects of Ben in beast form, it looks worse than Halloweentown prosthetics, so of course I'm calling it out. I actually don't mind a lot of it. Sure, I'm not a big fan of the music, but that kind of universally applies to all of these, and I do like the goofy little rock and roll number between Hades and Mal. Not necessarily the music, it's just a bizarre idea to have the God of Death sing and dance complete with mood lighting and fireworks with his angsty teen daughter complete with a tambourine break. Thanks, decom musicals, you don't disappoint when it comes to bizarre stuff to make fun of. Also, the dancing breaks Audrey's curse on living armor. Seriously, they just cause a shock, and then these characters take turns dancing, and the armor copies it like a Kinect game. This is just goofy, and I absolutely love this idea. I don't even care that this is never explained. So why morally is this the best? Well, the other two plot points had me raise eyebrows, whereas here, every single plot point that has that gets rectified by the movie's conclusion. Looking back in context, yeah, the love potion thing is still something they don't address and actively reward Mal doing. Yeah, I'm still on that, but the broken system of Oridon feels extremely deliberate. That, and yes, Descendents is very much a trilogy, where if you like the first one, I don't see anything major against the other two. Otherwise, my biggest problem with this is probably stuff like them introducing new characters and keeping old ones. Cecilia's daughter has something to do, but the others just fall asleep and eat cake. And Chad is a stock comic foil jock character from the previous two, and I do like him in the second one, stealing Jay and Carlos's 3D printer to create action figures of himself. It's the kind of Sharpay-esque antics that no high schooler would do, and goofy enough to get a laugh, but here he just does nothing. It feels way longer than that than it is as a result of this. With that said, the good does outweigh the bad when looking at this through this lens of fluff show for 8-year-olds, and yeah, gun to my head, I wouldn't entirely be against watching these movies. The High School Musical trilogy, Cheetah Girls 1 and 2, Zenon, Halloweentown, and the Twitches series. However, I do have one more trilogy to get through, and the reason why I'm kind of stalling is because the director of this also did Camp Rock 2 and Cheetah Girls 3, so you could probably tell my guard is up before watching them, because I really see those as either the worst or most unnecessary sequels in the entire breakdown so far. Zombies. The title is written like it's meant to be spelled, but I'm not doing that. I just hope the 8 years between Camp Rock 2 and this, that there's improvement somewhere. I'm not asking for a lot, just something. Somewhere. Considering this is also a racism allegory, and oh boy, do I already anticipate cringe from this network tackling this issue. Mainly because, save for a few first entries and twitches, I don't think these properties have ever been good in a way that holds the scrutiny, as much as it is me enjoying that cheesy, easy to make fun of feel that occasionally dives into the insane. Racism was a thing addressed in Halloweentown, and its acknowledgement of that was terrible, so I'm not exactly jumping for joy clicking play. Their record to this in this regard hasn't been great. I'll say this, that when it's not making border wall jokes, I'm dancing around the subject matter because I feel like telling you guys what I like is a roundabout way of saying what's wrong with this. It has the same over-the-top cringe that I've actually been either charmed by or laughing at, whatever, that's happened before. There are rap numbers, but the best way to describe Disney-fied zombies rapping about the first day of school and framed in such a way that's trying to make their audience think they're cool, that's a thing, complete with a zombie talking in gibberish, is possibly the funniest rap number I've seen so far, and it's the first song. Also, one character is the football coach, and I love this character. The best way to describe him is that his team hasn't won anything, and as such, he's operating like it's his last school year before getting fired. So why bother? Until the zombie shows up, and he finally has some level of prospects for his team rather than literally nothing. He hires everyone, because why not? It's not like they have standards, and Jonathan Langdon is pretty good at this. Also, while the bully character is just a less fun Sharpay every single time, I didn't know when I started that she'd be the best bully character. His minions are named Stacy, Lacey, and Tracy. That's the kind of naming telegraphs that took the writers all of 20 seconds to actually name them. Just find a suffix to end every name with and just make the villain, make villain names. The issue I have with this, however, is in the moralizing. This is where the kind of cringe I don't like in these movies is coming full swing. Okay, the plot involves Zed the zombie and Addison being human. Zed wants to be a football star when that isn't an opportunity for zombies yet, and Addison wants to cheerlead, and it goes into the standard, we love each other, but we're torn apart by this racial stuff. He wins games through weird strength boosts by having his Fitbit that controls all zombies hacked. There's an evil cheerleader that hates zombies that decides to turn the bands off completely after hacking the computer doing this, and this leads to third act drama. Apparently having white hair is just as bad as being racially subjugated according to this movie, and sabotage is off the table because, and I'm quoting, "You're not going to change the world through sabotage, you're going to change the world through cheer." Also, Zed at one point changed into a normal human because at this point, why not? I do like some stuff around this movie, but when it fully gets demoralizing, it goes for just be yourself in the usual decom way, but once it starts talking about race, it just goes completely out the window. And this is yet another point where me being lighthearted and fun goes out the window. I'm going to tread lightly, as talking about this on the internet is a great way to be clipped out of context. See, when you have an issue like this, winning by being as inoffensive as possible and eventually the perpetrators around you are going to have that last 5-minute redemption arc that's going to be reversed a lot at the end of every decom is, it honestly feels so sanitized and not in reality at all, which I liked about the genre so far, but, well, just imagine a High School Musical movie where Troy gets stomach cancer and the song in his heart still solves everything. Your first thought would be, wait, what? The stomach cancer thing is gone just like that? That's how racism being solved through decom conventions feels. Very contrived and bad. So, how do the two sequels hold up? Zombies 2 carries on the tradition of 90% of the stuff I've talked about thus far of giving the exact same thing, but worse. The coach character is now an ice cream salesman, so that energy I liked is just gone. There's also no real funny cringe to this. There's a rap battle for an election for school president, and my complaints about the Descendents rap numbers are basically the exact same one for one. I also played good cop with the first movie with the race thing, and it kind of made sense to distill race into an interracial relationship because, let's face it, Disney's not greenlighting anything with this unless it has a teenage girl protagonist that's aspirational to the 8-year-olds watching, yet not alienating either. The thing is that when it's actively talking about race, the first Zombies movie is terrible. Guess what makes up a large amount of the plot this time? Also, you would think that when adding a new race and culture and their own conflict that's the driving force of the entire plot, would that mean that the central conflict of this metaphor for race relations is the race relations? You'd be wrong. It's the teenage girl's white hair. I'm serious, this apparently gave her an existential crisis that's the driving force behind her being so progressive, yet still feels like she hasn't found a place to belong. This is treated as being just as important, if not more so. It feels like the exact same complaints I had with Zenon coming right back. The plot really is werewolves are indigenous and humans stole their life force and they want it back and thinks she's the person to do it while more fighting for rights happens. All in all, while the audience watching are not going to pick up on the race thing, with that said, there was some stuff that charmed me in how in its own little world it was in the first movie. I feel like I don't quite get the impression the same audience is going to stick to this beyond the zombies and connected to the first one and they like the first one. When you get beyond that, what I talk about was the most damning thing I could say is that I feel like Zombies 2 is more empty than a lot of the other sequels I've talked about. Okay, this has one more chance. Zombies 3 has an opening number that's less than a minute long. It's definitely something that screams patched together at the last second. The score also gets worse when the best song is probably the one about Zed singing about how awesome he is, because a majority of the score is dubstep and rap again. I don't have anything against the rap genre, it's that nobody at the Disney Channel... Wait, this was on Disney Plus first? Don't care. Either way, they don't have the lyrical prowess to pull off a rap number without having me laugh or cringe. With that said, this has aliens introduced, and as someone who began talking about the stuff I like or want to talk about with Doctor Who, the world building is the strangest I've ever seen. The aliens and their planet are just called that, the aliens and our planet. Yet they have a culture of telepathy which is mentioned all the time but never used. They are harmonious despite causing thousands of dollars in infrastructure damage upon landing to scare the hell out of everything living in the town, and they have turned off emotion until arriving at Earth, which is used for comedic effect. But even the stuff the script has these aliens do almost convinces me that I'm laughing with the cringe rather than at it. Oh, and RuPaul is the voice of the mothership. Yeah, that's completely random. I think the aliens honestly have a Star Trek the original series vibes to their design, but this world building would never fly in Star Trek, and this includes the episodes about space hippies trying to groove up the Enterprise, and Mr. Spock joins in. The Way to Eden is the episode title, and yes, to everyone here that doesn't watch Star Trek, that's a thing, and it's one of the most hated episodes of the franchise. Oh, and that racial thing is now mostly peeled back to focus on cheerleading, because they literally have a cover story for the leads that's basically we've travelled for thousands of light years to attend a cheerleading competition, and nobody questions it. Oh, and now having white hair is equivalent to being an alien on Earth in secret. Yes, kidnapped, experimented on, and dissected is equivalent to looking like Sephiroth. But she's also 1/4 aliens, and now she's found true meaning instead of feeling like an outsider, except no, because she's been uniting the town for 3 movies and counting. Yes, I heard through the grapevine that Zombies 4 is coming out, and please make it more like this in 1 instead of 2. My favourite part is that even fans are calling out... okay, the aliens have to find a map that's to a utopia, that's, to quote... But where this thing is in quote, the most precious thing in the town. And she's Addison's grandmother, and the map is inside Addison. It's honestly a level past Zenon where it has to be about how important she is, whereas it's back to being funny again. Her most precious thing isn't her own daughter, it's the grandchild that has an existential crisis about white hair for 3 movies, who sees it as equal to forms of racial prejudice. Zenon wasn't this unhinged in their ideas, and considering Zenon 3 has a moon goddess force-lifting all evil, an evil billionaire, that's saying something. The thing in this movie that I'm not really a fan of, however, is the same thing I'm not a fan of in the previous movie either. Bucky. See, he's the racist cheerleader or class president. The thing is, he's egotistical to a cartoonish degree, while never really doing anything save for being an abject coward to try and preserve himself, and has right-hand people at his bidding, and even says he's going to take all the credit for every single accomplishment as school president, whether he was actually involved or not. The problem I have with this character is a little complicated, but I'll explain. See, I like Futurama and I like Zap Brannigan, and the thing about Zap is that the people around him are absolutely done with his stuff. The henchmen are generic decom henchmen, and everyone just gives him a pass because he's Bucky being Bucky. And it's just not funny, even though it's... Yet the stuff that's unintentionally funny, I laugh at. Now, what the hell even is this way? Stuff like hinging minorities getting into college on Zed when Eliza can literally build a robot out of junk. Of course, that doesn't compare to a proven sports doper. This series is so backwards that it circles back to being something I laugh at. On that note, don't look at this series through a lens of actually dissecting the racial stuff through, though, because it's objectively bad at it. You get really horrible connotations with this series that's almost a Gordian knot of cringe. It isn't like Camp Rock where it's surface level, it's just dig a little deeper and this happens. Now that I'm done with zombies, for the moment, you would think that I'm done overall, and while I had fun, I wish it was, considering how long this is getting. However, there is a return to the non-musical Disney Channel original movie from what I've heard, and it's the only reboot this section of the Disney company ever did. I could be mad that I have to go back, however, this is a reboot of the first Disney Channel original movie ever broadcast. There were movies before this, however, it was more of a licensing thing. And this is when they grew to the point where they took that risk with, which led to Halloweentown a year later. Under Wraps from 1997, it got a reboot in 2021, and that got a sequel a year later. I could just let Sleeping Dogs lie, however, being this close to finishing talking about these movies, I have to. Just 3 more movies, and it's unfinished business done. This kind of feels more like something written in Goosebumps than anything else, and I mean that as in a very, this is just a poor man's Goosebumps kind of way. As the 3 leads are generic middle-class kids, one of which is a nerd afraid of everything. Its horror theme is very... Halloweentown is very kids movie-esque. Throw a Halloween coat of paint on, however, nothing is really villainous, not inherently. This does have that kind of setup at least, and the result is that it feels like Goosebumps wearing the skin of a very cheap horror movie for children. The weird thing is that the nerdy kid's mother collects dozens of antique dolls and asks to be called by the name of the character she's role-playing as. Doing what? I don't know, but today the impulse is that this kid should have CPS called on them. It's mostly about a resurrected mummified corpse bumbling into modern stuff and hijinks ensues. He's just some guy that gets resurrected because moonlight and has to go back in the coffin because reasons. Also, remember how I talked about the validating boyfriend when I talked about Zenon? I said not just like every other action hero from the 90s and prior needs to suck face with the closest woman, both are silly and stupid for their own reasons. Well, this has that. They don't kiss, but there's a romance by the end of the movie. What's not here is them having any inkling of a relationship before, especially, not romantically. Something happens in the climax and all of a sudden they're an item. It doesn't help that what is here is stuff like her saying really cringy dialogue that, well, none of the other dialogue in these movies are the kind of things you'd expect people to say to each other. The dialogue here is definitely the least I can imagine generic friend group from back then saying this dialogue. I don't have an exact idea, but whatever it was, it's not what's said in this movie, ever. However, otherwise, the worst thing I can level it under wraps is how generically 90s it all feels. Not in a fun, nostalgia kind of way, as in more of a, I like it when it's done well, but there's no emotional build-up or payoff to any of this. The only weird rush that I had from this was listening to all the things that the characters referenced that wasn't owned by Disney. Gilligan's Island, Hellraiser, Nightmare on Elm Street, Superman, Siskel and Ebert, The Sound of Music, Ghost, Pretty Woman, and Sleepless in Seattle. Star Wars is used, and this was before they bought that too. This being the rush I felt watching this probably made me think this really was a you just had to be there situation, because I completely get why Halloweentown actually got a sequel, and this took nearly 25 years to see anything I'm off of. In short, while I'm probably bracing myself for the wish being granted in the worst possible way, I get why this got a remake. However, I don't trust Disney to remake a movie simply because of cracks of age, so what did they do here? The honest thing I can say about Under Wraps 2021 is that it has this weirdly stuck in the 90s feel to even more of its presentation than in the original. The cowardly best friend being race swapped now feels less like a generic nerdy kid and more like they asked the kid to watch Chris Tucker movies and told him to just do that. And that and there were walkie-talkies between the two friends, and that wasn't in the original. The fictional horror movie being seen 6 times in the theater was also a weird thing. They just kept when they could just as easily plug Disney Plus or their adult section. It's Disney, I don't expect them to have any shame. There's also a generic bully character that wasn't in the original, and having their friend group shaken up by the girl as opposed to her just being there in the original, I wonder if some of this was cut for some reason from the original because this has a contemporary setting. It's just weird that they decided to keep that. There's even an extended dance sequence which feels like it was put there because they wanted to make this thing look cool. The other thing about its presentation, and this may sound like a contradiction, but trust me it isn't, is that it also feels like it's adhering to 2020's reboot cliches, like race-swapping characters, gender-swapping others, and the girl now has 3 dads. Personally, I'm fine with these changes. Their effect really doesn't hinder telling a story in any way. The adult monster-obsessed movie nerd that is friends with these kids, told you, 90s cliches, is now more a squeeing nerdy girl, and as I said, the best friend feels like a Chris Tucker wannabe now, but it's like a different path to the same destination, if that makes sense. A lot of people get really offended at this happening, and while I personally think it's a case-by-case thing, I really don't think this has anything to do with why the movie isn't a good remake of a movie I felt mostly impartial to. As I said in another video, I'm not against changes and remakes, I just want those changes to make sense. The changes here are mostly stuff that makes it somehow feel more 90s than the original and just adds stuff that feels way more cluttered and spinning its wheels than the original. I'll explain. Now the best friend wants to win a stuffed panda at a carnival game. It only gets mentioned once in the opening and then never spoken of until it comes back again. I feel like it's over-the-top presentation instead of something that Arms was just something to get people watching to remember that was a thing. Then there's a subplot about their teacher wanting them to do something creative that's ancient Egypt related, which they use as an excuse to make a monster movie. They also cut out the scene which actually shows the lead bonding with the mummy, so even its emotional investment of the first movie feels less earned. Okay, so people like to dunk on this movie when compared to its predecessor, but I think it's only fair to say what I liked in this movie. Weirdly, a handful of jokes did make me laugh. One of the changes to the story, race and gender changes don't count, that I like is the forced romance of the first movie, which is just gone. How you feel about this may depend on whether you tolerate that cliche or not, but if only DComs kill the validating boyfriend trope, at least the ones with no character, I'll be happy. And the subplot of the lead accepting his mother's new boyfriend into their lives is the only thing in both movies that seem to transfer unscathed. Either way, while I didn't exactly like this movie, I felt like it's the weakest movie I've watched, at least the weakest first entry since the first Camp Rock. So while I want to end this on a high note, I really don't think the Disney Channel is going to be so kind. So, under wraps 2. This feels like it falls into absolutely everything people complain about when it comes to DComs. It wasn't exhausting as Camp Rock 2, but it's still a little tiring. I guess the one cliche they actually have an answer to is the last minute turnaround. My problem with both these movies really is how unearned everything feels when it comes to emotional investment. Not even just as in compared to the original, as in other DComs, there was room to breathe, and while the drama wasn't organic, I didn't feel like there was supposed to care, that we were supposed to care right out of nowhere for these characters. Like a section of the last scene about the kid talking to the female mummy, the pharaoh's wife, and part of the plot involves these kids having to do everything to stop an evil mummy and plan for the wedding of the girl's fathers. I guess if you're looking for that sort of thing, here's a DCOM that actually has it. However, it's mostly taking up its own runtime with stuff like having a 13-year-old be the sole person responsible for picking up the rings and another mummy dance sequence. Freaking out about modern technology, there's just very little in terms of an emotional core. I'm not sure if the kid speaks to the pharaoh's wife one-on-one like he does with the other mummy. I won't say these are good emotional cores, but the Descendents does spend time on Mal and crew being outsiders. Zombies had the inspirational, can we make this work, and segregated wealth thing. High School Musical even had teenagers being unsure of what it was they really wanted and the societal pressures around them. So this just not having that, to me, is the biggest problem of the entire movie. There's also an ending that feels very preachy. One example of this is the evil mummy was best friends with the good mummy, but the good mummy fell in love with the so the evil mummy is basically another generic can't take no for an answer Disney villain. I know these people definitely exist, but Frollo and Gaston, that's all I'm saying. So at the end, there's this conversation about and the group drifted apart because it's a theme with the main kids here, and they'll try to never turn it into that. Not only does this feel very PSA-y, but they had the conversation about their friend group surviving, the two of them getting into content creation, and the third one feeling excluded earlier in the movie. It feels like an episode of He-Man ending, with He-Man literally talking to the viewers about what the moral of the story is. That really was the pinnacle of a cartoon patronizing its audience. Imagine that, but for every lesson these characters are supposed to learn. love conquers all. It doesn't matter if you screw up because you still have family. I know some people are crap at media literacy, but this was not the way to combat it. And before anyone says that's because of the gay stuff, because I'm certain there's going to be someone like that, all the High School Musical movies have Ryan Evans, the Descendents sequels have Harry Hook as a coded bisexual, and Aspen from Zombies 3 has they-them pronouns.
Fucking pronouns!
Right, I didn't complain about the delivery of the messages in any of those movies. I was more apt to complain about the messaging of Cheetah Girls 3, Camp Rock 2, and Halloweentown High. So that's a non-starter, because all of those other movies had 100% straight representation. Also, a lot of these movies that I liked previously did insane things with their plots and stuff to make me think that they don't take place in reality, which kind of endeared me to them, whereas this just doesn't do that. It genuinely feels like a dumb plot that got rushed out the door. Okay, I'll say what I liked. The acting has improved somewhat. I also get what it was they were going for by having a mummy that has a grudge against the good ones being revived. I think a lot of the stuff around it doesn't hold the scrutiny, but it's here, I guess. Also, a plot point is that the evil mummy mind controls a lackey, and I did laugh a little at the turnaround when he's correct about what's been going on in the first guess. Otherwise, while I know people like the original for nostalgic reasons, I'm honestly not really a fan of any of them. I do find the prospect of remaking it confusing because there are better Halloween-themed decoms that out there than these remakes. Halloweentown and the Twitches series. You could also throw the zombies movies in there if you want. So, this is the longest of these videos I've written. Usually I write in a conclusion just why I've watched all of this. Like, with my disturbing movies, I said that I think using movies as escapism is limiting, and in my Christmas movies, I went through trying to validate the different kinds of feelings you can have on the holidays, regardless of how suffocating that prospect may be. And I think we just kind of forget those. I guess the takeaway from this is that not all cringe is the same, that there is some level of fun to be had depending on how it's used. I am happy with letting people express themselves in this way, but that's not universal to every movie. Some movies really push that cringe into being frustrating, and others have very little cringe in them. I guess one of the big takeaways is that when you really break it down is that dumb fun is dumb fun, and there really is an agenda for that who should be solely placated to that. And because while I'm not rushing to defend most of this, at the same time I did enjoy a significant amount of what it was I watched. The reason why adults go back to this isn't just because they grew up with it, but because their own little world, I'll admit, is very effective at keeping me to watch these series. At least the ones I didn't mind. While it took me a while between series, a lot of these movies are a little unpredictable, but once I started watching the first entry of one I enjoyed, I spent the next night watching its sequel. With that said, not all of them reached that, so I guess the massive takeaway is that you can't rely on a company to deliver consistently good stuff or entertaining stuff, even if it's pushing that idea to the same market, since it's practically preached to its audience. Even after getting an appeal for these movies, I still got into a new series extremely cautiously as being the one that would represent all the bad talking points that this avenue of Disney is infamous for. Personally, I see this as a good thing because when brand names are looked out for over the people who actually put in the hard creative work, even the bad ones out there were still getting hard work put into them. The people who do that work suffered, and sticking to a formula while fun and easy at times doesn't guarantee a success. Disney is many things, but brave and experimental are not any of them, and the media landscape is poorer for it. Give credit to the people making these movies, just don't watch Kenny Ortega's remake of Rocky Horror. Rocky Horror was subversive and weird, which again, really isn't a thing in these movies. Yeah, this took a turn, but this actually took a good long while to make, and when I was done, I had something to write when concluding the others, and this was mostly just random thoughts cobbled together. Scrolling over 20 pages didn't help me round off. I hope you enjoyed either way. Please like, share, and subscribe, and if this gets over 1,000 views by December, I'll look at that Cheetah Girls Christmas album, so share away if you really want to see me suffer.